Before the first heat gathers over the valley, Egypt is already awake. A thin grey-blue light spreads across the river, touching the water before it touches the fields, and the Nile moves through the land with the calm authority of something older than every palace built beside it. On one bank, the cultivated ground lies dark and damp, cut into plots, ridges, channels, and low embankments. Beyond it, only a short walk away, the desert waits in silence, dry as bone, sharp as flint, and empty. Between those two worlds, green and gold, mud and stone, life in ancient Egypt takes shape. It is not born first in the tomb, or the temple, or the throne room. It begins where water has come and gone, where silt has settled, where a farmer studies the edge of a field and understands that the difference between plenty and hunger may be measured in the height of a flood. The most familiar image of ancient Egypt is often monumental pyramids rising against the sky, colossal statues gazing across centuries, golden masks shining in museum light. But for most Egyptians, most of the time, the world is smaller, more practical, and more intimate. It is the scrape of a hoe in wet soil, the smell of bread baking inside a mud brick house, the creak of a boat rope drawn tight, the murmur of animals near the water, the dust on linen after a day of work, and the calculation of how much grain can be stored before the next season turns. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if this is the kind of history and mystery you enjoy. The Egypt that survives in popular memory is often royal, but the Egypt that survives in the ground is also ordinary, stubborn, ingenious, and full of lives that left only fragments behind. To understand daily life here, the river must be seen not as a background, but as the central character in the story. Egypt is a narrow civilization in a long corridor, stretched along the Nile like a thread of green cloth laid across the desert. The contrast can be almost sudden: field, village, palm, canal, then the rising edge of barren land where tombs and cliffs catch the sun. People do not live in an endless landscape of rain-fed farms. They live in a land where fertility arrives from elsewhere, carried down from distant African highlands and released into Egypt by the annual inundation. What survives in the record suggests that this rhythm is so fundamental that Egyptians build their calendar, their taxes, their labour, their festivals, and their sense of cosmic order around it. The year is often understood through three great seasons. There is the season of inundation, when the river rises and spreads across the floodplain. There is the season of emergence, when the waters withdraw and the dark earth reappears, renewed by silt. Then comes the season of heat and harvest, when fields mature, grain is cut, and storage becomes a matter of survival as much as administration. This division is clear in Egyptian thought, but real life is never quite as tidy as a calendar. Floods vary, canals need clearing, boundaries between fields may disappear underwater and need to be marked again. A flood too low can bring scarcity. A flood too high can damage houses and settlements built too near the river. Scholars still debate the local effects of different flood years in different periods. But the larger truth remains firm: the Nile gives Egypt its daily possibilities, and it also gives Egypt its anxieties. At dawn, when villagers step out into the coolness, they are stepping into a managed landscape. The fields are not simply natural gifts, they are worked, measured, divided, and watched. Small irrigation channels guide water, mud embankments hold it. Cattle may be driven toward fields or water. Goats and donkeys move through the edges of settlement, and boats pass along the river with cargo that could include grain, stone, pottery, reeds, timber, fish, linen, or people on business that begins in one town and ends far downstream. The river connects Egypt as much as it feeds it. Where the desert makes overland travel difficult and heavy goods awkward to drag across rough ground, water becomes the great road. One lesser-known detail is how deeply Egyptian life depends on mud. Not mud as filth, but mud as material, memory, and architecture. The same river that nourishes barley and emmer wheat also provides the silt that becomes bricks. Most houses, walls, granaries, and town buildings are made not from the eternal stone of temples, but from sun-dried mud brick. This is why the daily world of Egypt survives unevenly. Stone monuments endure with theatrical confidence, while ordinary houses slowly melt back into the earth if left unprotected. The ruins can make it seem as if ancient Egyptians live mostly among stone columns and painted tombs, when in fact most daily life unfolds in spaces that are warmer, dustier, more perishable, and far more crowded. The evidence remains incomplete, not because ordinary life is unimportant, but because ordinary life is often built from things that decay. Still, enough survives to let the landscape breathe again. Archaeologists find traces of towns, villages, ovens, storage jars, animal pens, grinding stones, tools, textiles, baskets, sandals, broken pottery, written scraps, and human remains that reveal strain, diet, disease, skill, and movement. A piece of pottery can mark a meal. A worn threshold can hint at repeated footsteps. A grain silo can reveal fear of shortage and the power of whoever controls the harvest. No single type of evidence fully accounts for daily life, but together these fragments pull the story away from pharaohs alone and toward the people who made Egypt function day after day. The river's gift is also political. Grain is not only food, it is tax, wage, offering, ration, wealth, and security. A household may think about bread for the next meal, while officials think about storage, temple deliveries, work crew payments, and reserves against uncertainty. This does not mean Egypt is a simple machine run from above. Villages have their own pressures, families their own strategies, local officials their own ambitions, and workers their own complaints. But the base of the system is always visible in the dark soil at the river's edge. Because the Nile is predictable enough to organize life, yet unpredictable enough to inspire fear, it becomes more than a river. It becomes a sign of order, water returning after dryness, fertility after waiting, repair after damage. A field must be restored after flooding. A boundary must be restored after it's washed away. A house wall must be repaired after weather and time eat into it. In Egypt, survival is often an act of maintenance. So the first truth about daily life in ancient Egypt is both simple and enormous people live in negotiation with the river. They rise with its moisture in the air, measure their year by its behavior, build from its mud, travel on its surface, farm by its retreat, fear its extremes, and bury their dead near the desert that begins where its power fades, before the tomb painter lifts a brush, before the scribe sharpens a reed pen, before a priest enters a sanctuary. Before a ruler claims divine order, someone must plant, grind, bake, carry, mend, count, clean, steer, weave, and store. The mystery of daily life in ancient Egypt is not that these people are impossibly distant from us. It is that they are close enough to recognize, yet separated by a river of time that has carried away most of their voices and left us to listen for them in mud, grain, bone, and broken clay. The river gives Egypt its fields, but the house gives daily life its shape. After the first movement of dawn along the Nile, after animals stir and the air begins to warm, people return again and again to rooms made from the same dark earth that feeds them. The ordinary Egyptian home is not a palace in miniature. It is a practical shelter built from sun-dried mud brick, adapted to heat, dust, insects, storage, work, privacy, and the constant pressure of crowded human life. Its walls are made from mud mixed with straw or chaff, shaped into bricks, and left to harden in the sun. In a dry climate, such walls can last a long time if maintained, but they are never truly permanent. They crack, they crumble, they need replastering. Rain, rare though it may be in many parts of Egypt, can damage them badly. Wind eats their edges. People patch and repair them, generation after generation, until a house becomes not one finished object, but a living structure, always being remade. This is one reason the domestic world of ancient Egypt is harder to recover than the funerary world. Tombs were made to preserve memory. Houses were made to be used. Temples were built with stone to speak across eternity. Most homes were built with mud brick to survive the next season, the next summer, the next family need. Archaeologists can trace foundations, floors, ovens, storage bins, courtyards, stairways, and walls. But the full experience of living inside those spaces has to be reconstructed carefully. The evidence remains incomplete, and it is unevenly preserved. Some settlements give unusually vivid glimpses, while many others survive only as low mounds, fragments of pottery, patches of ash, and the ghostly outlines of rooms. Yet even these traces are enough to overturn a simple illusion. The world of ancient Egypt was not all open desert and monumental stone. Much of it was enclosed, shaded, domestic, and made from mud. A person entering an Egyptian house might first encounter a threshold raised slightly from the street, a practical defense against dust, water, animals, and the mess of settlement life. Streets could be narrow, irregular, and busy. They collected refuse, smells, and noise. A doorway, therefore, marked more than the edge of a building. It marked a boundary between public movement and household control. Inside, the house could be modest or relatively spacious, depending on wealth, location, period, and occupation. Many homes had a front area, storage spaces, a central room or courtyard, sleeping areas, and sometimes stairs leading to an upper floor or a roof. Roofs mattered. In the evening, when the heat trapped inside rooms became uncomfortable, people could sleep or work above, where air moved more freely and the night sky opened over the settlement. The roof is one of the quieter but more important spaces of the ancient Egyptian home. It may be used for drying food, storing materials, sleeping in hot weather, working with fibre, watching activity in nearby streets, or simply escaping the closeness of interior rooms. In a settlement built of mud brick, with houses packed near one another, privacy is partial, voices carry, smoke drifts, the sound of grindier stones, animals, babies, tools, and neighbours rises through the day. Ancient Egyptian domestic life is not silent and isolated, it is porous. A household belongs to itself, but it also belongs to a street, a neighbourhood, a work community, and a network of relatives and obligations. Inside the house, one of the most constant needs is storage. Grain must be protected, water must be held in jars, oil, beer, dried fish, legumes, dates, onions, garlic, and other foods require containers, linen, tools, baskets, sandals, cosmetics, amulets, documents, and personal objects need places of safekeeping. A home is therefore full of pottery and baskets, and many of the objects that archaeologists recover in great numbers are not glamorous at all. They are jars, bowls, stands, grinding stones, loom weights, broken handles, cooking vessels, and pieces of containers discarded after years of use. These objects rarely appear in popular fantasies of ancient Egypt, but they are the skeleton of daily existence. A household without storage is a household without security. Cooking brings heat into a place already ruled by heat. Ovens and hearths may be placed in courtyards or separate areas to reduce smoke indoors, though arrangements vary. Bread and beer, the foundations of the diet, require repeated labour, and their preparation shapes domestic space. Grain is ground, dough is mixed, ovens are heated, vessels are washed, fuel is gathered or managed, and food is portioned. The smell of baking bread may be comforting, but the process behind it is hard work. Grinding grain by hand is especially demanding, and the physical traces of this labour can appear in ancient bodies as wear on joints, backs, and teeth. What survives in the record suggests that the home is not merely a place of rest. It is a workplace, and much of its labour is repetitive, skilled, and physically costly. Light inside the house is controlled by necessity. Windows, when present, are usually small, placed high, or arranged to limit heat and preserve privacy. Doorways bring air and illumination, but also dust. Lamps may be used, though artificial light is limited compared with the brightness outside. The cool dimness of an interior room can be welcome at midday, when the sun turns open, ground harsh and white. Walls may be plastered, sometimes whitewashed, making rooms brighter and cleaner. Floors can be beaten earth or plastered surfaces, swept and maintained. Mats, low stools, headrests, boxes, jars, and simple furniture create a domestic world that is sparse by modern standards but not empty. Wealthier households may possess finer furniture, decorated items, imported goods, and more specialized rooms. But even humbler homes show care, arrangement, and adaptation. The battle against insects and pests is constant. Flies gather around food, animals, water, and waste. Grain attracts rodents. Sand and dust enter from streets and courtyards. The Nile's fertility brings life in abundance, not all of it welcome. Cleanliness in ancient Egypt is often discussed through elite grooming, cosmetics, shaving, perfumes, and linen, but everyday hygiene begins in more ordinary struggles, keeping food covered, sweeping floors, washing vessels, managing waste, repairing walls, and separating animals from living areas when possible. No single source can tell us exactly how every household handled these problems, and conditions varied greatly between a planned workers' village, a rural hamlet, a provincial town, and a larger urban centre. Still, the archaeological record makes one thing clear: daily life required constant negotiation with the materials of the environment. The house also holds memory, not the grand memory of royal inscriptions, but the memory of repeated gestures. A woman or man reaches for the same jar each morning. A mat is rolled and unrolled. A grinding stone becomes smooth through years of pressure. A doorway is touched by many hands. A wall niche may hold a small object of protection, a household god, an ancestor-related item, or something whose exact meaning is now uncertain. Scholars still debate the full interpretation of many domestic religious traces, partly because objects found in homes do not always explain themselves. A figurine might be protective, devotional, decorative, magical, or all of these at once. A small shrine-like installation might signal household ritual. but the surviving evidence does not always reveal who used it, when, or with what words. The home is therefore both familiar and elusive. It is the place where people spend much of life, yet it rarely speaks in complete sentences. Planned settlements such as workmen's villages and towns associated with royal projects give unusually concentrated evidence, but they should not be mistaken for all of Egypt. A community like Deir el-Medina, with its records and preserved domestic remains, offers a rare close-up of skilled workers and their families. Amarna, built rapidly under Akhenaten and abandoned after a short life, preserves another extraordinary view of houses, streets, workshops, and neighbourhoods. Lahun offers yet another kind of planned town connected to state activity. These places are precious because they let archaeologists move through the architecture of ordinary existence. But they are also special cases. Most Egyptians did not live in such perfectly documented settings. The danger is to let the best preserved evidence stand for everyone. A careful story must use these places as windows, not mirrors. Even so, through those windows, daily life becomes vivid. In the heat of afternoon, thick mud brick walls slow the sun's assault, but they do not defeat it. People seek shade, adjust work, move between rooms and courtyard, and wait for evening relief. At night, the settlement changes character. Roofs become sleeping platforms. Streets cool. The sound of the river may carry if the house stands near enough to water. Dogs bark. Donkeys shift. Somewhere, a lamp burns low beside a jar or a basket. And the house, patched from mud and held together by habit, contains everything a family needs to face the next day: food, tools, water, cloth, labour, memory, and a fragile wall against the vastness outside. By the time the sun has climbed high enough to press heat into the walls, the most important work inside many Egyptian homes has already begun. It is not dramatic work, and that is why it is easy to underestimate. Grain has to become flour. Flour has to become bread. Water, grain, yeast, and time have to become beer. Vegetables must be cleaned, fish dried or cooked, jars opened, ovens heated, ashes managed, and meals stretched across the needs of a household. Ancient Egypt can look, from a distance, like a civilization of stone, but from the inside, day by day, it is also a civilization of bread and beer. These two foods are not small details of Egyptian life. They are the foundation of survival: wages, offerings, taxation, and social order. Bread and beer appear in tomb scenes, ration lists, temple offerings, settlement remains, and administrative records because they sit at the centre of the Egyptian world. A worker may be paid in grain or loaves and beer. A temple may present them to the gods. A family may measure its security by what is stored in jars and bins. A dead person may be equipped for eternity with the same basic foods needed by the living. The form changes, the setting changes, but the logic remains: to live is to eat, to drink, and to trust that the harvest has not failed. The grains most closely associated with ancient Egyptian bread and beer are emmer wheat and barley. Though their use varies across time and place, these are not modern supermarket grains. Clean and easy to process, they demand labour. Before grain can become a meal, it must be threshed, winnowed, stored, measured, ground, sifted, mixed, shaped, baked, or brewed. Grinding alone is one of the great hidden labours of the ancient household. The stone does not move by itself. Hands push grain across hard surfaces again and again, and the work leaves marks not only on tools but on bodies. Tiny particles of stone grit can enter flour, and over a lifetime this abrasive bread may contribute to heavy tooth wear. It is a strange and intimate detail. The daily bread that sustains the body can slowly damage the mouth that eats it. Bread itself comes in many forms. It may be round, conical, flat, thick, coarse, fine, sweetened, flavoured, or shaped for particular contexts. Some loaves are ordinary household food, others belong to offerings, feasts, or institutions. Ovens vary as well, from simple hearth arrangements to clay bread moulds and more specialised installations. The familiar image of a person calmly pulling a loaf from an oven hides a chain of activity that reaches backward to the flood, the field, the harvest. The threshing floor, the storage room, and the grinding stone. A single loaf contains a landscape. Beer is just as important, and it is not simply a recreational drink in the modern sense. Egyptian beer is a food, a safer liquid in some contexts than untreated water, a source of calories, a ration, a social drink, and a ritual substance. Its texture and strength probably vary widely. Some beer may be thick, nutritious, and cloudy, closer to liquid bread than to the clear drink many people imagine today. Brewing uses grain, water, fermentation, vessels, warmth, and knowledge acquired by repetition. The exact methods remain debated, partly because artistic scenes, residue analysis, experimental archaeology, and texts do not always align neatly. Scholars still debate details of ancient brewing techniques, but the broader picture is clear: beer is woven into the ordinary economy of the body. A household meal, however, is not only bread and beer. The Nile Valley offers vegetables, fruits, fish, birds, and livestock, though access differs sharply by class, season, region, and wealth. Onions, leeks, garlic, lettuce, cucumbers, pulses, dates, figs, grapes, and melons may appear in different contexts. Honey can sweeten food, though it is more precious than everyday flavouring for everyone. Oils and fats matter. Salt and drying help preserve fish and meat. The river provides fish in abundance, and fish bones in settlements remind us that ordinary diets are not always identical to idealized elite scenes. Some Egyptians eat fresh fish, others rely on dried or salted forms. Birds may be trapped in marshes. Cattle, sheep, goats, and pigs are part of the wider food economy, though meat is not equally available to all households. For many people, meat is occasional rather than daily, tied to status, festivals, institutional distributions, or special events. The marshland is especially important to the Egyptian imagination and diet. In Tumart, elites are shown hunting birds or spearing fish in lush wetlands, surrounded by papyrus, waterfowl, and movement. These scenes can be symbolic, ritualized, and idealized. They are not simple snapshots of everyday meals, yet they preserve something real about the environment. The Nile and its floodplain support fish, birds, reeds, and wild plants. The marsh is a place of food, materials, danger, pleasure, and myth. It is also a reminder that daily life is not confined to the house and field. People move through river edges, canals, ponds, and wetlands, gathering what the cultivated land alone cannot provide. Food also reveals hierarchy, an elite banquet with carved furniture, fine vessels, wine, meat, music, perfume, and carefully arranged abundance belongs to a different world from the meal of a labourer after a day in the sun. Wine exists in Egypt and can be prestigious, especially in elite and ritual contexts. But beer is far more central to broad daily life. fine cuts of beef may signal wealth, while a more ordinary household may depend on bread, beer, vegetables, legumes, fish, and whatever else can be acquired. Even the quality of flour and bread may differ. A wealthy home can command finer ingredients, better storage, servants, and more varied foods. A poorer home must manage scarcity with skill. This does not mean ordinary meals are joyless. Food is not only fuel, it marks hospitality, kinship, festivals, offerings, and comfort. The smell of bread from an oven, the sharpness of onion or garlic, the sweetness of dates, the coolness of beer, the rare pleasure of meat, the shared handling of a jar or bowl, all of these belong to the emotional world of a household. The evidence remains incomplete, because people rarely leave behind direct accounts of how a familiar meal felt, but archaeology preserves the conditions around those feelings. It gives the jars, ovens, bones, seeds, tools, hearths, and waste pits. From them, a human rhythm emerges. There is also a quiet tension behind food in Egypt. Abundance depends on systems that can fail. Grain storage protects against bad years, but it also creates power. Whoever counts grain can control lives. Whoever distributes rations can command labor. A harvest is not only a natural event, it becomes an administrative event, a taxable event, a political event. At the household level, this means that the bread placed on a mat is never completely separate from scribes, storehouses, temples, estates, and officials. The meal is private, but the grain economy is not. So the daily table, humble as it may seem, opens into the whole structure of ancient Egypt. The Nile rises, fields drink, grain grows, officials count, workers carry, families grind, ovens burn, beer ferments, and the body continues. Every loaf is a small victory over uncertainty. Every jar of beer holds the memory of floodwater, field labour, domestic skill, and social order. In the glow of an oven, the grandeur of Egypt becomes suddenly smaller and more real. It is not only a civilization that builds for eternity. It is a civilization that wakes each morning hungry and survives because someone knows how to turn grain into life. Once bread and beer have been made, once the household has taken in enough food to begin the day, Egypt opens outward into work, the village path, the field edge, the river bank, the workshop, the cattle yard, the construction site, the temple storeroom, the dock, and the scribe's office are all parts of the same living machine. Ancient Egypt is sometimes imagined as a land where kings command and everyone else simply obeys. But daily labour is far more varied than that. It is organised, watched, taxed, and sometimes coerced. But it is also skilled, seasonal, local, and deeply practical. Most people do not spend their lives carving tomb walls or dragging stone blocks for pyramids. Most people live inside an economy of farming, animal care, craft production, transport, storage, repair, service, and administration. The grandeur of the state rests on hands that are usually absent from royal inscriptions. For the majority, work begins with the land. Farming is the foundation, and the rhythm of agricultural labour follows the river's changing moods. After the inundation withdraws, fields must be prepared quickly while the soil holds moisture. Farmers use hoes, ploughs drawn by cattle, baskets, sickles, wooden tools, and human endurance. Emmer wheat and barley are planted, weeds are managed, irrigation channels are maintained, animals are driven. and later the harvest is cut with sickles that may have flint blades set into wooden handles. Grain is gathered, threshed, winnowed, measured, and stored. The work is repetitive, but it is not simple. It requires judgment about soil, water, timing, pests, labour, tools, animals, and obligations owed to estates, temples, or officials. The farmer's world is shaped by both nature and bureaucracy. A field is not only a patch of earth, it is a unit that can be measured, assessed, inherited, rented, taxed, disputed, and reclaimed after the flood changes its edges. Officials may inspect crops, scribes may record yields, surveyors may restore boundaries. In a good year, the system can appear orderly. In a difficult year, the same system can become a pressure point. A low flood may leave fields dry. A high flood may damage settlements and delay work. The evidence remains incomplete for the experience of every village and every region. But what survives suggests that Egyptian labour is always balanced between the predictable cycle of seasons and the unpredictable burden of actual conditions. Animal care runs alongside farming. Cattle are wealth, labour, food, and ritual value. Donkeys are essential for transport, especially away from navigable water. Sheep and goats provide meat, milk, hides, and other materials. Pigs are present in some contexts, though they occupy a complicated place in Egyptian culture and are not always represented with the same prestige as cattle. Herding, feeding, watering, milking, breeding, and protecting animals are daily tasks that rarely look monumental but deeply matter. A sick ox can threaten ploughing, a lost donkey can slow transport. A herd is not just property, it is stored energy, social value, and risk on legs. At the river and in the marshes, another world of work unfolds. Fishermen cast nets, use traps, lines, baskets, and spears, and move through water landscapes that are both generous and dangerous. Fish can be eaten fresh, dried, salted, traded, or sent into institutional stores. Boatmen guide vessels along the Nile, carrying people, grain, stone, pottery, livestock, reeds, timber, and messages. The river makes Egypt seem unified, but that unity depends on constant labour steering, rowing, sailing, loading, unloading, repairing hulls, managing ropes, watching currents, and reading winds. A boat is a tool of commerce, administration, pilgrimage, military movement, and ordinary travel. Without boatmen, Egypt's long shape would become a problem instead of an advantage. In towns and villages, work shifts from field to craft. Potters shape clay into the vessels that make daily life possible. Weavers turn flax into linen, the fabric of Egypt. Basket makers work reeds and fibres into containers, mats, and practical household goods. Leather workers produce sandals, straps, bags, and fittings. Carpenters shape imported and local woods into furniture, doors, tools, chests, coffins, and boat parts. Stoneworkers carve vessels, statues, architectural pieces, tools, and tomb equipment. Metalworkers handle copper, bronze, gold, silver, lead, and alloys according to period, region, and access. Recent studies of settlement metallurgy remind us that metalworking is not only a royal or elite matter. At sites such as Tel El Retaba in the eastern Delta region, traces of copper and copper alloy working point toward practical craft activity inside lived settlements, showing how even small fragments of slag, crucible, or metal waste can open a window into ordinary production. The workshop is a place of skill, smell, heat, dust and danger. Clay dries too quickly or too slowly. Kilns must be managed. Stone dust enters lungs. Metal glows and cools. Linen production depends on the long preparation of flax, from harvesting and retting to spinning and weaving. Many crafts require training over years, and some are embedded in families or work gangs. Others are tied to large institutions, temples, palaces, estates, or royal projects. A skilled craftsperson may not be wealthy, but skill gives identity. The maker of a vessel, a bead, a tool, or a painted coffin participates in Egypt's visible culture in ways that are often anonymous. Museums preserve finished objects, but behind them stand gestures repeated so often that the body remembers what the written record forgets. There is also construction, the most famous labour of Egypt and perhaps the most misunderstood. Popular imagination often reaches for enslaved masses and impossible suffering, but mainstream archaeological understanding is more complex. Egyptian building projects use organised labour forces, seasonal corvée labour, specialists, supervisors, ration systems, and skilled crews. Conditions could be hard, and labour could certainly be compulsory in many contexts. But the workers who built major monuments were not simply a nameless mass outside society. Evidence from workers' settlements, cemeteries, rationing systems, and tools shows organisation, provisioning, hierarchy, and professional skill. Scholars still debate details of labour recruitment, status, and conditions across different periods and projects. But the old image of all monuments being built only by enslaved foreigners does not account for the evidence. The labourer beneath the sun may be quarrying stone, hauling mud brick, cutting reeds, carrying water, plastering walls, clearing canals, digging foundations, shaping blocks, or mixing mortar. Work can be seasonal, during inundation. When fields are under water and agricultural labour changes, the state may mobilise workers for building, transport, or maintenance. This does not make the work easy. Heat, dust, accidents, strain, and repetition leave marks. Skeletons from ancient work communities can show stress, injuries, arthritis, and the physical cost of labour. Yet the record also shows social worlds around labour housing, rations, families, disputes, friendships, religious practice, humour, absence notes, and complaints. Work is not only exertion, it is community. The scribe watches many of these activities from another angle. He records grain, labour days, deliveries, absences, tools, livestock, taxes, wages, and disputes. His work depends on farmers, boatmen, and craftsmen, but their work can also depend on him. A miscounted ration, a recorded debt, a disputed field boundary, or a delayed delivery can shape lives. This creates a social divide that will become sharper later. But even here it matters. Manual labour feeds Egypt, while record-keeping allows the state to claim, redirect, and remember that labour. By late afternoon, the land bears the marks of work everywhere. Fields show footprints and cut stalks. Workshops hold broken sherds and waste. Boats rest lower in the water with cargo. Animals return dust-coated. A worker's shoulders ache. A potter's hands are dry with clay. A farmer calculates tomorrow's task before today is fully done. Egypt's monuments may be made to outlast time, but the civilization itself runs on work that must be repeated every day. If it stops, bread stops. If bread stops, labour stops. If labour stops, the temples, tombs, storehouses, and royal dreams become only stone beside a silent river. Inside the house, behind the mud brick walls that hold back glare and dust, Egyptian life is organized not only by labor, food, and storage, but by family. The household is the basic unit through which people eat, work, inherit, worship, remember, and survive. It is not always a simple picture of one couple and their children in a neat private space. A household may include relatives, dependents, servants, workers, older family members, and others tied by obligation or need. Its shape can change across class, region, and time, but at its center is the same practical truth found in the fields and workshops. Daily life depends on cooperation. A person alone is vulnerable. A household stores grain, raises children, manages property, shares labor, negotiates disputes, and carries names across generations. Marriage in ancient Egypt is usually not framed by a single formal religious ceremony in the way many modern societies imagine marriage. What survives in the record suggests that marriage is often recognized through cohabitation, family arrangement, social acknowledgement, and legal or economic agreements. A couple may establish a household, share property, and raise a family without leaving behind a ceremonial description that satisfies modern curiosity. This absence does not mean marriage is casual or unimportant. It means the evidence comes to us through contracts, letters, inheritance arrangements, tomb scenes, titles, and household traces rather than through a full manual of domestic life. Scholars still debate the details of marriage practice in different periods, especially for ordinary people who did not leave abundant written records. But the broad picture shows marriage as a social and economic partnership as much as a personal bond. One of the striking features of ancient Egyptian society, especially compared with many other ancient civilizations, is the relatively strong legal position of women. This should not be exaggerated into modern equality. Egypt remains hierarchical, patriarchal in many social habits, and shaped by class. Elite men dominate most high offices. Royal ideology often centers masculine kingship, even when queens become powerful, and public administration is heavily male. Yet Egyptian women can own property, inherit, make contracts, initiate legal action, divorce, and manage economic matters in ways that surprise many people expecting the ancient world to be uniformly restrictive. A woman's identity is not erased into her husband's legal personhood. She can appear before authorities, hold goods in her own name, and pass property to heirs. This legal visibility matters inside daily life. A married woman might bring property into a household, receive property from her family, hold rights over goods, or negotiate matters after separation. Divorce is possible, and agreements can specify support or division of property. Widows can manage estates or act on behalf of dependents. Women could also be involved in buying, selling, lending, hiring, and temple service, depending on status and period. The evidence remains incomplete for poorer households, because poorer people leave fewer documents, but where records survive, women are not invisible. They stand in the legal and economic light more clearly than in many neighbouring societies. The home, however, is not simply a legal unit, it is a place of work. Women's daily labour is essential, even when it is less celebrated in official monuments. Grinding grain, baking bread, brewing beer, spinning, weaving, managing food, cleaning vessels, caring for family members, preparing textiles, supervising servants or younger relatives, and handling household goods all belong to the economic structure of Egypt. In wealthier homes, some of these tasks may be delegated, supervised, or shared among servants and workers. In poorer homes, the same work falls more directly on household members. The distinction between domestic labour and economic labour is modern and not always useful here. A loaf of bread made in a house can feed workers, serve guests, fulfill obligations, or support trade. Linen made in a domestic setting can clothe the body and carry value. Household production is real production. Men's roles are equally shaped by household expectation. A man may be a farmer, boatman, scribe, soldier, craft worker, priestly servant, herder, builder, or official, but he's also a son, husband, father, brother, debtor, heir, and ancestor in waiting. His public identity rests on family continuity. Tomb scenes often show idealized families standing together, husband and wife before offerings, children presented in orderly rows, names preserved carefully. These scenes do not record every family's reality, and they often belong to people with resources to commission monuments. But they reveal what Egyptians value: continuity, provision, memory, and the hope that descendants will speak names and bring offerings after death. Family life also includes affection, conflict, and negotiation. Letters and legal text can preserve concerns over inheritance, quarrels between relatives, accusations, requests for support, and disputes over goods. The ancient Egyptian household is not a perfectly harmonious painting. It can be loving, practical, tense, generous, and difficult. Property complicates relationships. Grain, land rights, animals, tools, furniture, jewelry, clothing, and tomb equipment all have value. When someone dies, the question of who receives what can draw private grief into public dispute. The ideal of order is powerful, but daily life produces disorder, and the family is one of the places where order must be remade. Childbirth and parenthood sit near the heart of household life, but they must be approached carefully because the evidence is intimate and incomplete. Birth usually takes place within a domestic or female-centered setting, rather than in a formal medical institution. Protective objects, household deities, amulets, and ritual practices surround fertility, pregnancy, birth, and the care of infants. Figures associated with protection, such as Tower and Bez in later and popular domestic contexts, point to the emotional seriousness of bringing new life safely into the world. Children appear in art, toys, household traces, and family scenes. But for this story, it is enough to say that they are protected, taught, and gradually drawn into the skills and expectations of their community. Childhood is not separated from the adult world as sharply as in many modern societies. Yet it is still a recognized stage of life, surrounded by care, instruction, play, and family hope. Names matter deeply. To name a child, to preserve a parent's name, to identify oneself as the son or daughter of someone, is to place a life inside a chain. Egyptian identity is often relational. People are remembered through parentage, titles, occupation, and connection to household or institution. In a world where mortality is close and memory is sacred, the family becomes a bridge across time. The dead depend on the living for offerings and remembrance. The living depend on the dead for continuity, legitimacy, and protection. Household power therefore extends beyond the present. A family is not only the people eating together today, it includes ancestors, expected descendants, property from the past, obligations in the present, and hopes for the future. There is a quiet surprise in this domestic world. Ancient Egypt is famous for kings who claim divine authority, but much of Egyptian continuity is carried by people who never rule anything larger than a room, a courtyard, a storage jar, a field share, or a family agreement. A woman securing her property, a man repairing his father's house, a couple dividing grain, a grandmother preserving household knowledge, a young apprentice learning a trade from relatives. A widow defending inheritance rights. These lives rarely become monuments, yet they are the fabric out of which Egypt is made. The palace can command, the temple can receive offerings, the scribe can count. But the household absorbs the pressure of history and turns it into another day of living. By evening, when heat begins to loosen its grip and rooftops become habitable again, the family gathers in ways the record can only partially recover. There may be food, work still unfinished, clothing to fold, tools to mend, plans for tomorrow, small acts of worship, complaints about neighbours, worries about grain, memories of the dead, and the ordinary closeness of people who depend on one another. What survives in the record suggests a society in which family is not sentimental decoration. It is power, economy, law, labour, memory, and shelter. Behind the great public face of ancient Egypt stands the household, and within that household, women, men, elders, and children hold together the daily order that makes the civilization possible. In the same households where grain is stored, bread is baked, and family property is guarded, children grow into Egypt almost by absorption. They do not enter a world designed apart from adults. They grow beside ovens, looms, courtyards, workshops, animals, boats, fields, shrines, and storage jars, learning first through watching, carrying, imitating, and being folded into the practical rhythm of the home. Ancient Egyptian childhood is difficult to reconstruct in full because children rarely speak for themselves in the surviving record. Their traces come through toys, miniature objects, school exercises, family scenes, letters, burials, names, and the marks of learning left on ostraca and writing boards. The evidence remains incomplete, and it is often shaped by adult expectations. But what survives suggests that childhood is not invisible. It is present in the house, in the street, in training, in play, and in the hopes families attach to the next generation. A child in an Egyptian village or town first learns the world through nearness. The smell of bread, the weight of water jars, the sound of animals, the texture of linen, the heat of brick walls, the brightness of fields after floodwater retreats. These are not lessons written down, but they form knowledge. Young people see adults measure grain, patch walls, shape clay, repair tools, carry baskets, manage animals, and prepare food. They learn that the year has a rhythm, that certain tasks come after the river falls, that shade matters, that storage matters, that neighbours hear more than one might wish, and that family reputation is not an abstract idea. In a society where survival depends on repeated skills, education begins long before formal teaching. Play still exists. The ancient world is not made only of labour. Archaeologists have found objects interpreted as toys or playthings, dolls, balls, small animal figures, miniature tools, and game pieces. Some objects are difficult to classify with certainty. A small figurine may be a toy, a ritual object, a teaching object, or something that changed meaning depending on context. Scholars still debate the interpretation of many such finds, especially when they come from domestic settings without written explanation. Yet it would be strange to imagine children in Egypt without play. Wherever children live, They turn the materials around them into movement, imitation, and imagination. A courtyard can become a place of learning without ever becoming a school. A small model object can mirror adult life in safer, simpler form. Formal education is much more limited. Literacy in ancient Egypt is powerful precisely because it is not universal. Most children do not become scribes. Most will never read long religious compositions, copy administrative documents, or calculate deliveries for a state institution. For the majority, training is practical and occupational. A farmer's child learns the field. A craft worker's child may learn clay, fibre, wood, stone, metal, or paint. A boatman's child grows familiar with ropes, currents, cargo, and river language. A household that depends on weaving, baking, brewing, fishing, herding, or trade passes knowledge through repeated observation and guided participation. This kind of education leaves fewer written traces than scribal schooling, but it may be the most common form of learning in Egypt. Scribal education, when it appears, opens another path, a boy, and in rarer cases perhaps a girl depending on status, family context, and period, may learn to write. The student begins with discipline of hand and eye signs, words, model phrases, lists, letters, accounts, and copied compositions. Writing is not simply a technical skill. It is a doorway into administration, status, and a different relationship with labour. A scribe can count grain rather than thresh it, record work rather than carry stone, compose petitions rather than rely on someone else's pen. Ancient educational texts often praise the scribal life and contrast it with the hardship of manual trades. These texts are not neutral descriptions. They are part of a culture that trains students to value literacy and endurance. Still, they reveal a real social divide. To write is to enter the machinery of power. The schoolroom, where it exists, is not necessarily a separate institution in the modern sense. Teaching can take place in connection with temples, administrative offices, households, or work communities. Students practice on ostraca flakes of limestone or pottery sherds because papyrus is valuable. These broken pieces, discarded after exercises, are among the most human objects ancient Egypt has left behind. On them are copied signs, awkward lines, corrections, lists, moral instructions, model letters, and sometimes drawings. They preserve effort rather than achievement. The perfect inscription in a tomb shows the polished face of literacy. A school ostracon shows the hand trying to become steady. Learning is also moral. Egyptian instruction texts emphasize self-control, obedience, restraint, respect for superiors, measured speech, and the value of order. These ideals belong to a society that prizes ma'at, the principle of balance, truth, rightness, and cosmic order. At the household level, such ideals become practical advice: do not waste, do not speak recklessly, do not bring shame on the family, do not ignore obligations, do not act as if one lives alone. Of course, ideals are not reality. People argue, disobey, gossip, complain, and make mistakes. The very need for instruction suggests that human behaviour is never fully orderly. But the instruction itself reveals what adults want children to become: competent, controlled, useful, respectful, and able to carry the household forward. The path into adulthood likely comes gradually rather than through one universal ceremony. A young person takes on more tasks, learns a trade, joins work, marries, manages property, bears responsibility, and becomes visible in legal and economic life. Age, class, gender, location, and family occupation all shape this process. In elite families, sons may be trained for administration, priestly service, military roles, estate management, or court life. Daughters may learn household management, textile production, religious duties, music, property knowledge, and the social skills expected of their rank. In more modest households, training is closely tied to survival. Skill matters because a household cannot afford uselessness. Yet this should not be mistaken for emotional coldness. Practical training and affection can exist together. A child can be loved and still expected to help. Family identity surrounds all of this. Children are not only young individuals, they are future caretakers of names, property, rituals, and memory. They may one day inherit a field chair, continue a craft, maintain a tomb, speak offerings for the dead, support aging relatives, and pass on household knowledge. In Egyptian thought, continuity is sacred. The living and the dead remain connected through remembrance, offerings, and names. A child, therefore, represents more than the next worker in the household. A child represents the fragile continuation of the family line. There is one detail that makes this world feel unexpectedly close. Some surviving learning exercises show mistakes, uneven handwriting, repeated signs, and the small frustrations of education. Across thousands of years, the student's hand can still be seen struggling with form. The distance between ancient and modern life narrows for a moment. The materials are different, the language is different, the society is different, but the experience of learning by repetition is recognizable. A child tries to copy what an adult has placed before them. The result is imperfect. The lesson continues. By the time evening settles over the village, children are part of the same domestic atmosphere that held their parents and grandparents. They are near the grinding stones, mats, jars, tools, lamps, and household gods. They hear adults speak of work, grain, neighbours, illness, festivals, taxes, and the dead. They absorb a civilization not as an idea, but as a set of habits. Ancient Egypt survives to us through monuments, texts, and artifacts. But to its youngest members it first appears as the shape of a room, the sound of a river, the feel of sun on mud brick, and the quiet certainty that one day they too will be expected to keep the household alive. From the uneven marks of a student's exercise, the path of writing leads into one of the quietest forms of power in ancient Egypt. The scribe does not need to lift stone, cut grain, row a boat, or fire a kiln to shape the lives of others. His tool is small, a reed pen, a palette, ink, a writing surface, and the trained memory of signs. Yet with these modest things he can turn a harvest into a tax, a day of labour into an official absence, a dispute into a petition, a delivery into proof, and a person's name into something that may survive long after the body is gone. In a society where most people cannot write, literacy is not simply a skill. It is access to the machinery by which Egypt counts itself. The scribe's authority begins with a basic fact. Egypt is a civilization of records. Not everyone writes, and not every event is recorded. But the state, temples, estates, work crews, courts, and household with enough resources all depend on writing to make obligations visible. Grain must be measured, fields must be assessed, labour must be assigned, rations must be distributed, tools must be issued and returned, animals must be counted, offerings must be listed, letters must travel, contracts must be drawn, tomb equipment must be ordered, workdays must be tracked. If the Nile gives Egypt life, writing gives Egypt memory. at least the kind of memory that institutions can use. The writing itself exists in different forms and settings. Monumental hieroglyphs carved or painted on stone carry religious, royal, and commemorative weight. Cursive scripts, written more quickly on papyrus, pottery sherds, limestone flakes, wood, and other surfaces, handle much of the practical work of administration. The scribe's world is therefore not only the beautiful inscription on a temple wall, it is also the rough note, the account list, the delivery record, the legal text, the private letter, the school exercise, the label on a jar, the docket on a document, and the hurried mark made because something needs to be remembered before it disappears into argument. This gives the scribe an unusual position between worlds. He depends on manual labour, because there is nothing to count without farmers, herders, potters, weavers, quarrymen, boatmen, builders, brewers, bakers, and metal workers. But those workers may also depend on his records, because pay, status, obligation, and blame can pass through his hand. A workman who misses a day may need that absence explained. A team awaiting rations may need a list corrected. A family disputing property may need a written agreement. A temple receiving goods may need proof that the proper amount arrived. A field boundary washed out by flood may need official measurement. Writing does not create reality by itself, but it gives certain people the power to define reality for others. The quietness of this power makes it easy to miss. Kings announce themselves with stone. Priests move through ritual space. Soldiers, when they appear, carry the visible force of the state. The scribe often sits, watches, listens, writes, and stores. Yet his work can be decisive. A number recorded too high can burden a household. A number recorded too low can reduce an institution's claim. A name omitted from a list can matter. A complaint written clearly may travel farther than an angry voice in a courtyard. In a culture that values order, the written record becomes one way of making order seem real. Scribal training reflects this privilege. Educational texts often present writing as a path away from bodily hardship. They contrast the scribe with other professions in ways that are clearly exaggerated and self-serving. The farmer suffering under taxes, the soldier enduring danger, the washerman working in unpleasant conditions, the potter covered in clay, the smith near heat, the labourer bent by effort. These compositions are not simple documentaries of working life. They are persuasive training texts, designed to make students endure difficult lessons by imagining the reward of literacy. Still, they reveal something true about Egyptian social aspiration. To become a scribe is to step closer to authority, even if one never becomes rich or famous. The scribe's body, however, is not free from discipline. Writing for long periods requires posture, concentration, memory, and precision. The palette, often with spaces for red and black ink, is both tool and symbol. Black ink carries most text. Red can mark headings, corrections, emphasis, dangerous words, or special categories depending on context. Papyrus is precious, so practice often takes place on ostraca, the broken pottery and limestone flakes that preserve so many traces of learning and routine. In those discarded fragments, Egypt's bureaucracy becomes strangely intimate. One can see not only official order, but hesitation, correction, habit, and fatigue. Temples intensify the relationship between writing and power. A temple is not only a place of worship, it is an economic institution, landholder, employer, storehouse, ritual center, and archive. Offerings must be recorded. Priestly service can be scheduled. Estates tied to temples produce and receive goods. Sacred texts must be copied, maintained, and performed. Knowledge itself becomes guarded. The ability to read ritual instructions, hymns, calendars, lists, and theological writings give certain specialists a privileged role in sustaining the relationship between humans and gods. The ordinary person may bring devotion, fear, hope, and offerings, but the temple scribe helps preserve the formal language through which divine order is managed. At the same time, writing reaches beyond high institutions into ordinary worries. Letters from ancient Egypt can be practical, emotional, demanding, affectionate, irritated, or anxious. They ask for goods, report problems, complain about behavior, negotiate obligations, and maintain relationships across distance. A letter can cross the gap between someone at home and someone away on assignment. It can carry a request for grain, a reminder of duty, a warning, or a plea. The evidence remains incomplete, and surviving letters come disproportionately from places and people whose materials happen to endure. But they remind us that writing is not only state control, it is also personal reach. Legal documents sharpen this further. Sales, loans, marriages, divorces, inheritance arrangements, property transfers, and disputes may all enter writing, especially when the people involved have access to scribal service. This does not mean every agreement in Egypt is written. Oral arrangements, custom, witnesses, and local memory remain important. But when writing is available, it can fix a claim in a more durable form. It can protect, threaten, clarify, or complicate. A woman defending her property, a worker disputing rations, a family dividing inheritance, a neighbour accusing another of theft all may enter the world of written record if the case reaches that level. No single document can reveal the whole society, but together they show daily life pressed into lines of ink. There is a contradiction here. Writing preserves ancient Egypt for us, but it also distorts what we see. Because scribes write most of the surviving words, the world often appears through scribal eyes. Literate men speak loudly in the record, while many farmers, craft workers, servants, and women appear indirectly when their actions touch documents made by others. Even the ordinary details we treasure are filtered by survival dry rubbish heaps, administrative archives, tomb deposits, school exercises, and chance preservation. Scholars still debate how far written evidence can be used to reconstruct the lives of the majority, because the majority did not leave continuous written self-portraits. Egypt speaks, but not evenly. And yet, without scribes, much of ancient Egypt would fall silent. Their lists may seem dry, but dryness is sometimes where life hides best. A ration list tells us what workers received. An absence note hints at illness, family duty, religious observance, or conflict. A delivery record reveals supply networks. A court document exposes tension. A school text reveals ambition. A label on a jar turns an object into evidence. The scribe does not merely decorate civilization with writing. He gives later centuries the broken keys by which daily life can be unlocked. As the day moves toward its end, one can imagine the scribe setting down his pen while the farmer returns from the field, the potter from the wheel, the boatman from the river, and the household from its unfinished tasks. This scribe's hands may be cleaner than theirs, but his work has passed through all of them. In the grain they grew, the goods they carried, the hours they owed, the offerings they supplied, and the names they needed preserved. He is present. His authority is quiet. But it reaches far. Ancient Egypt is made by labour, sustained by water, fed by grain, and remembered through ink. Beyond the house, beyond the field, beyond the scribe's careful lines of ink, Egypt gathers itself in streets. These streets are not the broad ceremonial avenues that survive best in imagination, with temples at one end and kingship carved into stone. They are narrower, dustier, more crowded and more alive. They run between mud brick walls, turn around irregular corners, open into small courtyards, pass workshops, lead toward river landings, and fill with the signs of ordinary exchange. A person stepping out from a doorway enters a world of sound donkeys braying, dogs barking, pottery clattering, tools striking, women and men calling across thresholds, traders negotiating, children moving under watchful household eyes, and somewhere nearby, the steady labour of someone grinding grain or shaping clay. The street is where private life leaks outward and public life begins. Ancient Egyptian settlements vary enormously. A planned workman's village is not the same as a farming hamlet, and a royal city is not the same as a provincial town in the Delta. Some communities are laid out with striking order, their streets and houses arranged according to institutional purpose. Others grow more organically, shaped by family expansion, local terrain, canals, older walls, and repeated rebuilding. Amarna, founded rapidly under Akhenaten and abandoned after only a short span of occupation, gives one of the clearest archaeological windows into urban life because so much of its ancient layout was not buried under later cities. Lahun offers another carefully planned settlement tied to state activity. Deir el-Medina preserves an unusually detailed world of skilled workers. These places are not typical in every respect, and scholars still debate how far they can stand for wider Egypt. But they reveal how dense, practical, and socially layered settlement life could be. A village street is not clean in the modern sense. Dust is constant. Refuse must be managed, but not always in ways that would satisfy later expectations. Pottery sherds, ash, straw, animal dung, broken tools, food waste, and sweepings accumulate in certain places. Dung may be nuisance, fuel, fertilizer, or evidence, depending on who is handling it and who is studying it thousands of years later. The smells are mixed bread ovens, beer mash, animals, river mud, sweat, smoke, dried fish, damp reeds, hot brick, oil, and dust. Ancient Egypt is often imagined through polished museum objects, but daily life has odour, noise, pressure, and clutter. A settlement is not a display case. It is a living organism. Markets in the modern sense, with fixed coin-based buying and selling, do not define most of pharaonic Egypt for much of its history. Exchange exists, but it often works through barter, measured commodities, rations, wages in kind, institutional redistribution, local trade, and values expressed in standard units such as deben of copper or silver as accounting measures. Coins arrive much later, and do not belong to most of the periods people picture when they imagine ancient Egypt. This can be surprising because the absence of widespread coinage does not mean the absence of commerce. People still acquire what they need: grain, cloth, fish, vegetables, pottery, oil, tools, sandals, livestock products, and small crafted goods all circulate through households, institutions, and local exchange. A person might trade surplus for something lacking, receive rations from an employer, owe deliveries to an estate, or arrange goods through kinship and neighbourhood ties. At the edge of the river, exchange grows louder. Docks and landing places are points where Egypt's long geography becomes immediate. A boat arrives from upstream with jars, sacks, stone, wood, or people. Another waits for cargo. Men haul ropes, baskets, jars, and bundles. Officials may check deliveries. Fishers unload catches. Reed workers bring materials from marshy areas. Traders or agents move goods towards storerooms and workshops. The riverbank is a working edge, not a scenic border. Mud sucks at feet, cargo shifts, water rises and falls. A badly handled load can break, spill, or delay a chain of obligations extending far beyond that single landing. Animals are everywhere in this human landscape. Donkeys carry loads through streets too narrow or rough for larger transport. Cattle move near fields or yards. Goats nose through edges of settlement. Dogs act as companions, guards, scavengers, and nuisances. Cats, admired in Egyptian culture and useful around stored grain, belong to a world where rodents threaten food supplies. Birds gather near refuse and water. Insects thrive where food, animals, and moisture meet. The ancient town is therefore a shared habitat, crowded not only with humans but with creatures drawn into the human economy. Some are valued, some tolerated, some fought constantly, and some move between categories depending on circumstance. Workshops give the streets their particular energy. A potter's area may be marked by clay, water, turning, drying, firing, and the debris of failed vessels. A weaver's work is quieter but no less important. Producing linen that clothes bodies, wraps the dead, pays obligations, and marks status. Metalworking brings heat, smoke, colour, and risk, especially where copper alloys are shaped into tools or objects. Stone and woodworking produce chips, dust, and noise. Food production creates its own industrial rhythm ovens, grinding spaces, breweries, storage yards, and distribution points. In large or specialized settlements, some areas may cluster by activity, though the evidence remains incomplete and does not always allow easy reconstruction of every neighborhood's function. The ancient street may combine domestic space and productive space so closely that the difference between home and workplace almost disappears. In a city, social contrast sharpens. Larger houses may stand near humbler dwellings. Official buildings, temples, storage areas, and workshops shape movement. People of different status cross paths without living the same life. A high official may move through streets supported by servants and records, while labourers carry loads past him. A skilled artisan may enjoy respect within a work community, but remain dependent on rations and supervisors. A woman managing household exchange may negotiate with confidence in one context and face pressure in another. A foreign trader, soldier, captive, messenger, or migrant worker may bring another language, style, or object into the flow. Egypt is not sealed off. It absorbs materials, people, influences, and goods from Nubia, the Levant, the Eastern Mediterranean, the deserts, and inner Africa, though the degree and character of contact vary by period. The delta towns add another dimension, because northern Egypt is not simply a smaller version of the Nile Valley south of Memphis. Its waterways, marshes, routes, and contacts with the Eastern Mediterranean and Near East make it especially dynamic. Recent excavations at places such as Tel El Fararin, ancient Emet, remind modern observers that Egyptian urban life could include dense neighborhoods, substantial buildings, grain facilities, religious spaces, and complex local economies beyond the more famous monumental centers. Such discoveries matter because they shift attention away from the idea that Egypt's real life happened only at pyramids, temples, and royal tombs. Ordinary streets in less famous towns may preserve the social architecture of a civilization more honestly than a king's colossal statue. Yet even in crowded settlements, the desert is never far from the Egyptian imagination. In many places, one can move from town to field, field to canal, canal to river, and then look west or east toward dry cliffs, cemeteries, quarries, roads, and shrines. The living town and the landscape of the dead are neighbours. Goods move between them. Workers leave the settlement to build or decorate tombs. Families prepare offerings. Priests and officials travel between administrative and sacred spaces. The daily street, with its animals and odours and bargaining, exists beside eternity. This nearness may be one reason Egypt feels so strange and powerful. The most ordinary life unfolds in sight of the most permanent ambitions. As evening returns, the street changes again. Work slows but does not vanish. People carry water, close storage rooms, bring animals in, exchange news, finish small tasks, and retreat toward rooftops and courtyards. Dust settles on thresholds. Boats tie up along the river. A potter covers drying vessels. A scribe's note may decide tomorrow's ration. A neighbour's complaint may become the beginning of a dispute. The settlement breathes out heat. What survives in the record suggests that ancient Egyptian daily life is never only rural, never only royal, never only sacred, and never only domestic. It is all of these at once, compressed into streets where mud-brick walls hold human voices for a little while, before time breaks them open and leaves only foundations, sherds, footprints, and the faint outline of a life once lived in motion. Against the dust, heat, sweat, and glare of Egypt, the body becomes one of the most carefully managed spaces of daily life. Clothing is not only decoration, and beauty is not only vanity. In ancient Egypt, appearance belongs to comfort, status, hygiene, labour, sexuality, ritual purity, protection, and identity. A person's body moves through fields, workshops, houses, streets, temples, and tombs, and each setting places demands on skin, hair, cloth, scent, and gesture. The same civilization that builds with mud and stone also pays close attention to linen, oil, coal, beads, wigs, razors, sandals, mirrors, combs, and the small tools that make the human body presentable before neighbours, employers, gods, and the dead. The most important fabric is linen, made from flax. This detail alone says much about Egypt. Wool is known, and other materials exist, but linen dominates Egyptian clothing in a way that fits the climate, the agricultural system, and ideas of cleanliness. Flax must be grown, harvested, processed, spun, and woven before it becomes the simple white garment so familiar from tomb art. The finished cloth can look effortless, but behind it lies a long chain of labour, much of it carried out by women and specialised workers. Linen can be coarse or extremely fine. It can wrap the body loosely, hang in folds, be pleated, tied, belted, layered, or shaped into garments that signal status. A labourer in the field may wear a simple loincloth or short kilt suited to movement and heat, while elites may wear finer linen, more elaborate pleating, jewellery, perfumed cones in certain artistic contexts, and accessories that announce wealth without needing a spoken claim. White linen is especially powerful in Egyptian visual culture. It reflects light, suggests cleanliness, and fits religious ideals of purity. Priests, in many contexts, are associated with careful washing, shaved bodies, and clean linen as part of ritual service. But the daily reality is more complicated than art can show. White cloth in a dusty country does not remain perfect for long. People sweat, streets are dirty, work stains garments, clothing must be washed, dried, folded, mended, reused, and eventually recycled. The evidence remains incomplete for the full range of ordinary clothing because textiles are fragile and survive best in dry conditions or protected contexts. Still, enough linen fragments survive to show extraordinary skill, from practical cloth to fine weaving that could be almost translucent. Egypt's famous smooth silhouettes are not just artistic convention. They rest on real textile expertise. Sandals are another sign of practical adaptation. Many Egyptians may go barefoot much of the time, especially in domestic or working contexts, but sandals made from leather, palm fiber, papyrus, or other materials protect feet when terrain, heat, status, or occasion requires it. Footwear can be simple, but it can also be carefully made. The ground matters. Fields are wet after irrigation. Streets hold refuse and broken pottery. Desert paths burn and cut. And ceremonial spaces may require specific forms of presentation. The foot, like the hand, belongs to labour. Its protection is not a minor concern. Hair and grooming open a more intimate window. Egyptian art shows men and women with carefully arranged hair, shaved heads, wigs, braids, curls, and elaborate styles. But these images do not map perfectly onto daily reality. Wigs are associated with status, fashion, ceremony, and perhaps practical comfort in certain contexts. Shaving the head or body can help with cleanliness and lice control, and it carries ritual significance for priests. Razors, combs, hairpins, tweezers, mirrors, and cosmetic containers show that grooming is a regular concern. The body is not left to nature, it is shaped, smoothed, scented, cooled, marked, and displayed. Cosmetics are among the most recognizable features of ancient Egyptian appearance. Kohl around the eyes is not merely aesthetic, it reduces glare, protects against some eye irritations, carries social meaning, and may hold protective or magical significance. Green and black eye paints, made from minerals and processed ingredients, appear in containers and art across long periods. Malachite, galena, and other compounds are part of this world, though formulas vary. Scholars still debate the exact medical effects and symbolic meanings of some cosmetic substances, but the broader point is clear: the painted eye is at once beautiful, practical, and protective. In a sun-struck country where dust and insects can irritate the eyes, beauty and survival are not always separate categories. Oils and perfumes also matter. Skin dries in heat. Hair and scalp need care. Scent can signal cleanliness, erotic appeal, ritual readiness, and status. Oils may be rubbed into skin or hair, and scented preparations appear in elite contexts as signs of refinement. Ordinary people may have humbler access, but the desire to manage smell and dryness is not limited to elites. The ancient settlement is full of smoke, animals, sweat, fish, mud, and waste. To smell pleasant, or at least controlled, is social power. It means the body has not surrendered to the street. Jewelry adds another layer. Beads, amulets, collars, bracelets, anklets, rings, earrings, and pendants can be made from faience, shell, bone, stone, glass, gold, copper alloys, silver, carnelian, turquoise, lapis lazuli, and other materials, depending on wealth, trade, and period. Some pieces are ornamental, some are protective, many are both. A necklace can beautify the body and guard it. An amulet can signal belief and identity. a scarab, wedge at eye, dwarf god figure, or protective symbol may be worn close to the skin because danger is imagined not only as physical but spiritual. What survives in the record suggests that Egyptians do not see the body as sealed off from unseen forces. It is vulnerable, and adornment can become armor. Medical care belongs to this same concern for the body. Ancient Egyptian medicine includes practical observation, herbal remedies, bandaging, surgery in limited contexts, treatment of wounds, dental concerns, eye problems, digestive troubles, gynecological knowledge, and magical spiritual elements. Modern categories of medicine and magic do not always fit neatly here. A remedy may combine ingredients, spoken formulae, divine names, and practical treatment. This does not make it irrational in its own setting. It reflects a world where illness can have visible causes and invisible dimensions at the same time. The evidence remains uneven, coming from medical papyri, mummies, skeletal remains, tools, art, and household practices, but it shows that Egyptians watch the body carefully. They diagnose, treat, soothe, protect, and explain. The body also reveals class with brutal honesty. Elite art idealizes smooth skin, slender waists, strong shoulders, youth, and controlled posture. But skeletal evidence from many Egyptians tells a harder story: worn teeth, arthritis, healed fractures, spinal stress, infections, nutritional strain, and the marks of labor. Farmers, craft workers, builders, and household laborers carry their work in their bones. A woman grinding grain, a man hauling loads, a potter bending over clay, a scribe sitting for long hours, a boatman straining against river movement all leave different traces. The decorated body seen in tomb art and the worked body found in burial grounds are not contradictions. They are two faces of the same civilization: the ideal and the cost. By night, after the day's work, the body needs relief. Linen loosens, sandals are set aside, skin is washed if water and circumstance allow, hair is combed, oil applied, insects brushed away, sore muscles rested. A mirror made of polished metal catches lamplight. A bead string is removed or kept close for protection. A household member may prepare for sleep on a mat, bed, or roof beneath the cooling air. The body that Egypt presents to eternity in art is composed, youthful, and serene. The body that lives through an ordinary day is sweaty, dusty, tired, adorned, protected, and carefully tended. In that difference, daily life becomes visible again, not as an abstract scene painted on a tomb wall, but as skin under sun, cloth against heat, eyes darkened against glare, and hands still smelling faintly of oil, grain, clay, or river mud. The same hands that wash dust from the body, fold linen, seal jars, and cover the evening fire also reach toward the unseen. In ancient Egypt, religion is not confined to the great temple doorway or the solemn chamber where priests serve a hidden god. It enters the house quietly. It rests in amulets worn against the skin, in small figures placed near beds, in protective signs marked on objects, in offerings made for the dead, in festivals that spill through streets, in dreams that seem to carry meaning, and in the anxious hope that the world can be kept in balance one day longer. To modernize, daily life and religion can look like separate categories. To ancient Egyptians, they are woven together so tightly that pulling them apart can distort both. The official religion of Egypt is vast, formal, and richly organized. Temples hold estates, workers, storerooms, ritual calendars, priests, scribes, offerings, sacred images, processions, and theological traditions that can be remarkably complex. The great gods, Amun, Ra, Ptah, Osiris, Isis, Hathor, Horus, Thoth, Sekhmet, and many others stand at the center of cosmic order and local identity. But most Egyptians do not meet the divine primarily as abstract theology. They meet it through need. A household wants protection from illness, danger, bad luck, infertility, nightmares, quarrels, dangerous animals, uncertain childbirth, and the ordinary vulnerability of the body. A farmer wants a good flood and a good harvest. A worker wants safety, wages, health, and justice. A family wants the dead remembered and the living kept whole. This is where household religion becomes important, though it is one of the more difficult parts of Egyptian life to reconstruct. Archaeologists find figurines, amulets, small offering spaces, painted niches, ancestor busts, ritual objects, protective images, and strange deposits inside or near domestic settings. Yet the evidence rarely explains itself in full. A small object found in a house may be religious, magical, decorative, inherited, discarded, or used in ways that changed over time. Scholars still debate how to interpret many domestic religious traces, especially because the line between magic, medicine, ritual, and ordinary habit is not always clear. What survives in the record suggests a home alive with protective practices, but not every object can be translated into a confident story. Among the most vivid protective figures are Bes and Taweret, deities associated especially with protection in intimate, domestic, and vulnerable areas of life. Bes often shown as a dwarf-like figure with a striking face, leonine features, or a frontal stance unusual in Egyptian art, appears on amulets, beds, mirrors, cosmetic objects, vessels, and household items. Taweret, with a body combining hippopotamus, crocodile, lion, and human elements, stands as a powerful protective presence. These beings are not distant like the sun at the horizon or the king in a palace relief. They are close to the bed, close to the body, close to the room where people sleep, recover, give birth, heal, and fear what cannot be seen. Their forms may appear strange, even fierce, because protection in ancient Egypt is not always gentle. It often takes terrifying shape in order to frighten danger away. The amulet is one of the clearest examples of religion touching the body, a small object tied around the neck, placed in wrappings, sewn into clothing, carried in a bag, or set near a person can hold symbolic force. The wedget eye, scarab, jed pillar, tayet, knot, heart amulet, animal forms, divine figures, and other signs can protect, renew, stabilize, heal, or connect the wearer with the divine power. Some amulets belong to the living, some to the dead, and many ideas pass between both worlds. To wear protection is to admit that life is exposed. A person can work carefully, eat wisely, wash often, and still fall ill or suffer misfortune. The amulet does not replace practical action, it completes it. Dreams also belong to the borderland between daily life and the divine. Egyptians pay attention to dreams as possible messages, warnings, or signs, though interpretation varies by period and context. Some dream books classify images as favourable or unfavourable, turning the strange theatre of sleep into something that can be read. This does not mean every Egyptian treated every dream with the same seriousness, or that surviving dream texts tell us exactly how ordinary households spoke about the night. The evidence remains incomplete, but the interest in dreams reveals a wider attitude the visible world is only part of reality. Meaning can arrive indirectly in sleep, illness, coincidence, omen, ritual, or sudden misfortune. Festivals draw religion out of temples and into the streets. On ordinary days, the central cult image of a god may remain hidden within the temple, served by priests rather than viewed freely by the public. But during festivals and processions, divine presence can move outward. Sacred boats, images, standards, music, offerings, crowds, food, drink, and celebration transform the settlement. People who may never enter the inner sanctuary can still participate in the god's journey through sound, sight, movement, and emotion. A festival is not only worship, it is social release, economic activity, public gathering, local pride, and a rare break in the repetitive pressure of labour. The god becomes visible in the life of the community, and the community sees itself gathered around the god. Religion also enters through the dead. The boundary between household and tomb is not absolute. Families remember ancestors, bring offerings, speak names, and imagine the dead as still capable of receiving care and perhaps giving help. The ideal afterlife depends on memory and provision. Food offerings painted or placed in tombs are not only symbolic decoration, they belong to a system in which the dead continue to need sustenance in transformed form. At the household level, this means that family religion reaches backward. A living person does not stand alone. Behind them are parents, grandparents, kin, and named ancestors whose memory must not vanish. Forgetting is a second death. This ancestor connection may be especially visible in certain domestic contexts, where busts, stelae, offering tables, or household installations suggest forms of family-based devotion. Yet again, caution matters. A bust found in a house does not automatically reveal the exact ritual performed before it. A niche does not explain the words spoken there. A small altar does not tell us who approached it, whether daily, monthly, seasonally, or only in crisis. No single explanation fully accounts for all such evidence across Egypt's long history. Domestic religion changes by period, region, class, and household. But the pattern is strong enough to show that the sacred is not monopolized by temples. Magic, in the Egyptian sense, is not a fringe practice outside religion. Heka, often understood as a kind of effective power or magic, belongs within the structure of the cosmos. Words, images, gestures, substances, and names can act. A written spell, spoken formula, drawn figure, or prepared object may help protect a person, treat illness, repel danger, or support transition into the afterlife. Modern categories can make this seem contradictory: medicine on one side, magic on another. Religion here, science there. Ancient Egyptian practice does not divide the world so sharply. A remedy may include herbs and divine names. A protective image may be placed near a bed as seriously as a practical precaution. The unseen and the material work together. This worldview does not make Egyptians passive. They do not simply wait for gods to solve daily problems. They irrigate fields, repair walls, count grain, store food, train scribes, build boats, wash bodies, treat wounds, negotiate contracts, and go to court. But beneath all this activity lies the awareness that human effort alone may not be enough. The flood might fail, a sickness might come suddenly, a snake might enter a storehouse, a dispute might turn dangerous, a birth, journey, harvest, or burial might pass through uncertainty. Religion gives language and action to that uncertainty. By the time lamps are lit inside mud brick rooms, the divine has not withdrawn into temple darkness. It remains near the sleeping mat, the doorway, the jar, the amulet, the ancestor's name, the festival memory still echoing in the street, and the small object whose full meaning has been lost but whose presence tells us someone once wanted protection. Daily life in ancient Egypt is practical to its core, but it is never merely practical. Every loaf, every field, every body, every family, every house stands within a universe that must be guarded from disorder. The ordinary Egyptian home is therefore not only a shelter against heat and dust, it is a small frontier between the known and the unknown, where human hands try, with mud, grain, ink, oil, prayer, and memory, to keep the world from coming apart. If household religion brings the divine close to the bed and doorway, Deir el-Medina brings ordinary people close to us. On the west bank of the Nile, in the dry hills near Thebes, a small village once housed the skilled workers who cut, carved, painted, and prepared the royal tombs of the Valley of the Kings and the Valley of the Queens. It is not an ordinary village in every sense. Its people are connected to one of the most prestigious and secretive projects in Egypt, the making of tombs for kings and royal family members. They are supported by the state, organized into crews, watched by officials, and tied to a sacred landscape of death and memory. Yet precisely because of this special role, their lives are unusually well preserved, through houses, tombs, tools, letters, accounts, complaints, legal records, sketches, and thousands of ostraca. Deir el-Medina gives one of the most detailed glimpses of daily life anywhere in ancient Egypt. The village sits in a desert valley, separated from the cultivated land and river by distance and terrain. This isolation matters. Unlike farmers living directly beside fields, the workmen of Deir el-Medina depend heavily on deliveries: grain, water, vegetables, fish, firewood, pottery, tools, and other supplies have to reach them through organized systems. Their lives therefore reveal the strength and fragility of Egyptian administration. When deliveries arrive, the village can function. When they are delayed, frustration grows quickly. A settlement that helps build eternity still depends on someone bringing water. The people of Deir el-Medina are often called workmen, but that word can flatten their skill. These are not untrained labourers. They include stonecutters, draftsmen, painters, plasterers, sculptors, carpenters, and other specialists. They understand rock, line, pigment, proportion, ritual imagery, hieroglyphs, and the careful sequence by which a royal tomb becomes a prepared place for the afterlife. They work in crews, traditionally divided into left and right sides, with foremen, deputies, scribes, and supervisors. Their labour is physical, artistic, religious, and administrative at once. A painted wall in a royal tomb may look effortless in the dim glow of modern electric light, but behind it lies planning, measuring, smoothing, sketching, correcting, colouring, and the disciplined repetition of inherited forms. Their work schedule is known in unusual detail compared with most ancient labour communities. Records note attendance, absences, deliveries, tools, rations, and tasks. Some ostraca list why a worker did not appear: illness, a family matter, participation in a festival, brewing beer, helping with a burial, being bitten by a scorpion, or other reasons that feel startlingly human. The exact interpretation of individual notes can be debated, and not every absence formula reveals the full story behind it, but the larger effect is unmistakable. The people of Deir el-Medina were not anonymous hands. They had names, habits, excuses, obligations, rivalries, and moments when ordinary life interrupted official work. The houses in the village are built close together, mostly of mud brick, arranged along narrow streets within a walled settlement. They are modest compared with elite villas, but they are not meaningless shelters. A typical house may have a front room, main room, side spaces, storage, roof access, and areas for domestic work. Some contain benches, niches, cellars, grinding installations, and traces of household ritual. The closeness of the houses means life is intensely social. Neighbours hear one another, disputes spread, news travels quickly. A village of specialists is also a village of gossip, debt, friendship, marriage, inheritance, and resentment. Women at Deir el Medina appear vividly in the records, though still unevenly. They manage property, exchange goods, write or commission letters, participate in legal disputes, and maintain households while men may be away working near the royal tombs. Some women are involved in textile production, food preparation, household management, and religious life. The documents show women suing, defending claims, receiving property, sending messages, and appearing as active figures in village society. As in broader Egypt, this legal and economic visibility should not be turned into a simplistic picture of equality, but it matters. The village record shows households as active units in which women's decisions and claims can shape outcomes. The village also preserves the texture of conflict. People accuse one another of theft. They quarrel over tools, goods, inheritance, tomb equipment, insults, and debts. They bring complaints to local authorities. They use witnesses. They appeal to officials. They negotiate, threaten, and defend themselves. A community devoted professionally to the orderly afterlife of kings is in daily practice, full of disorder that must be managed. This is one of Deir el Medina's great gifts to history. It reveals that ancient Egypt's love of order is not proof that life was orderly. It is proof that order had to be worked for. One of the most famous episodes from Deir el Medina is the workers' strike during the reign of Rameses III, when delayed rations pushed crews to stop work and protest. They did not frame their action as a modern labour movement, and it should not be forced into modern categories too neatly. But the event is extraordinary. Skilled workers, dependent on state supply, refused to continue when their basic provisions failed. They moved to public and sacred spaces, voiced their complaint, and demanded the rations owed to them. The episode reveals a hard truth: beneath royal grandeur, even the tomb of a king depends on bread, beer, oil, fish, vegetables, and a functioning supply chain. Eternity can be interrupted by late wages. The artistic life of the village is just as revealing. Deir el Medina has yielded sketches and practice drawings on limestone flakes and pottery sherds animals, gods, kings, workers, musicians, humorous scenes, erotic images, trial compositions, and informal exercises. These drawings show artists thinking with their hands. They are freer than finished tomb paintings, less constrained by the solemnity of official space. A draftsman might sketch a lion, a dancer, a god, or a figure in motion. Some images are playful, others are technical. They remind us that Egyptian art is not produced by magic or by rigid formula alone. It is made by trained people who practice, experiment, correct, and sometimes amuse themselves. Illness and injury also appear in the village record. Workers report sickness. Bodies show strain. The desert location brings heat, scorpions, snakes, dust, and the difficulty of hauling supplies into a remote settlement. Tomb work itself can be demanding: cutting rock, breathing dust, carrying tools, working in confined spaces, climbing paths between village and valley. Medical help exists in some form, and remedies may combine practical treatment with protective or magical elements. As elsewhere in Egypt, the evidence remains incomplete, but the village makes clear that the makers of royal immortality lived with very mortal bodies. Death is close in Deir el-Medina, not only because the workers build tombs for kings, but because they build tombs for themselves. Many villagers prepare decorated tombs nearby, often beautifully painted with scenes of worship, family, and the afterlife. This creates a moving contrast. The same hands that help create royal burial spaces also craft their own hopes for eternity. Their tombs are smaller, but not spiritually small. They show that artisans who served royal memory also wanted their own names, faces, and families preserved. The afterlife is not only a royal obsession, it belongs to the village street, the married couple, the workman, the singer, the mother, the scribe, the foreman, and the household that hopes not to vanish. Deir el-Medina must be used carefully. It is not a perfect model for all Egyptian society. Its residents are unusually literate compared with many communities, unusually tied to state projects, unusually well documented, and geographically distinctive. No single village can stand for every farmer in the delta, every fisherman in the marshes, every potter in a provincial town, or every family in an older settlement. Yet Deir el-Medina offers something rare the ordinary made legible. It lets us see not only the monuments Egypt wanted remembered, but the delivery delays, sick notes, arguments, sketches, jokes, prayers, and practical frustrations that stood behind them. As night falls over the village, the royal valleys lie silent beyond the hills. In the houses, people eat, argue, mend, pray, sleep, and worry about tomorrow's rations. The tomb walls they paint may promise eternity, but their own lives move through the fragile rhythm of any community work: food, illness, payment, love, conflict, devotion, and memory. In Deir el-Medina, ancient Egypt stops being only a civilization of kings. It becomes a neighborhood. A neighborhood like Deir el-Medina, with its rations, quarrels, sick notes, and petitions, reveals something that is true far beyond one village. Ancient Egypt is not held together by harmony alone. It is held together by the constant repair of conflict. The Egyptians speak often of order, truth, balance, and rightness, the principle they call ma'at. But the very importance of ma'at shows how easily life can tilt away from it. Grain can be stolen, tools can go missing, neighbors can insult one another, workers can complain about unpaid rations, family members can dispute inheritance, officials can abuse authority, contracts can be challenged, accusations can spread through a street faster than a boat moves downstream. Behind the serene faces painted on tomb walls is a society full of human friction, and daily life depends on ways to contain it. Law in ancient Egypt does not look exactly like a modern legal system, with a single surviving law code that explains everything. The evidence comes instead from court records, petitions, contracts, decrees, letters, administrative documents, wisdom texts, and later legal traditions. The record is rich in some periods and thin in others, and scholars still debate how local practice, royal authority, custom, temple institutions, and written procedure interacted across Egypt's long history. But the broad picture is clear enough. Egyptians expected disputes to be heard, property to be recognized, agreements to matter, witnesses to count, and wrongdoing to disturb not only individuals but the moral balance of the community. At the village level, A complaint might begin with something almost painfully ordinary. A tool has not been returned. A jar has disappeared. A donkey has been taken or borrowed beyond agreement. A woman claims property that others deny her. A worker says his ration has not arrived. A neighbour accuses another of entering a house or damaging goods. A family argues over what belonged to a deceased relative. Such disputes may be handled informally at first, through family pressure, neighbourly negotiation, or the intervention of respected people. Not every disagreement becomes a formal case. In a crowded settlement, people have strong reasons to settle matters without escalating them. Tomorrow they still have to pass the same doorways, share the same water sources, work beside the same crews, and hear the same gossip. When conflict becomes formal, it may move before local officials, councils, or courts sometimes referred to as kenbet, depending on context and period. These bodies can include officials, scribes, elders, or local authorities. Their composition and power vary, and the evidence does not always allow a neat reconstruction. Still, surviving records show people presenting claims, naming witnesses, producing documents, swearing oaths, and receiving decisions. Writing matters here. But speech matters too. A petition can carry a complaint upward. A testimony can fix memory into a public form. A witness can protect a claim or destroy it. A scribe, once again, becomes central, because a dispute not written may fade into argument, while a dispute recorded can travel through administration. Contracts are one of the clearest ways daily order becomes visible. Marriage arrangements, divorce settlements, property transfers, loans, labour agreements, sales, adoptions in some contexts, and inheritance matters may all be expressed through formal language. The contract does not mean people suddenly become less human. It means they know humans can be unreliable. A written agreement anticipates future conflict. It says that memory alone is not enough, that witnesses may be needed, that property must be named, that obligations must be defined before affection, convenience, or pressure changes the story. In this sense, Egyptian legal documents are not dry relics. They are evidence of trust made cautious. Property is especially important because so much daily life depends on things that are both practical and symbolic. A house is shelter, but also family continuity. A field is food, tax burden, inheritance, and status. A chest of linen is clothing, wealth, and security. Jewelry can be adornment, savings, memory, and protection. Tools carry the value of a craftsperson's work. Grain is survival. Tomb equipment is future hope. When such things are disputed, the argument reaches into the deepest structures of life. A fight over property is rarely only about property. It is about legitimacy, care, memory, obligation, and the fear of being pushed out of one's rightful place. Theft appears often enough in records to remind us that ancient Egypt is not a moral painting. People steal copper tools, clothing, food, wood, animals, and sometimes objects from tombs. Tomb robbery is especially charged because it violates the dead, the family, and sacred expectation at once. Royal tomb robbery cases from later periods preserve intense investigations, confessions, and bureaucratic concern, though the language and procedure can be difficult to interpret. At the everyday level, theft may be more modest but no less disruptive. If a worker loses a tool, he may lose the ability to perform his task. If grain is stolen, a household security shrinks. If a neighbour is suspected, the social fabric frays. Punishment exists, but it varies by offence, period, status and setting, fines, beatings, forced labour, restitution, mutilation in some severe cases, exile, and capital punishment can appear in the broader record, though one must be careful not to turn exceptional punishments into the atmosphere of every street. The daily purpose of justice is often restoration, as much as spectacle return the goods, settle the claim, identify the guilty, repair order, and make public truth stronger than rumour. The evidence remains incomplete, and not all social levels are equally visible, but Egyptian justice is clearly tied to the ideal that disorder must be named before it can be contained. Oaths give law a sacred edge. To swear by a god, a king, or a divine power is not merely to make a strong statement. It places the speaker under danger if the words are false. In a world where divine forces are active and a moral order is cosmic, lying under oath is not only a social risk, it is a spiritual one. This does not mean everyone tells the truth. The existence of oaths proves the opposite. People know lies are possible. But oaths raise the cost of deception by calling the unseen into human conflict. Gossip is harder to document directly, yet it must have been everywhere, in narrow streets, shared work sites, family courtyards, and closely packed villages. Reputation becomes a form of currency. A person known as unreliable, quarrelsome, dishonest, lazy, impure, or disrespectful may suffer socially even before any court hears a case. Letters and complaints sometimes preserve the edges of this world accusations, insults, demands for explanation, warnings about behaviour. What survives in the record suggests that speech itself has power. Words can damage order, but they can also restore it when used properly in petition, testimony, instruction, or prayer. Bureaucracy adds another layer. Egypt's administration can protect people by recording rights, wages, deliveries, and decisions. It can also burden them through taxes, labour demands, inspections, and delays. The same system that makes rations possible can fail to deliver them. The same scribe who records a worker's claim can also record an obligation against him. The same official who hears a dispute may be part of a local hierarchy full of personal interests. No single explanation fully accounts for how power works in every village or period, but the tension is clear order requires administration, and administration creates its own opportunities for injustice. This is why petitions matter. A petition allows someone lower in the hierarchy to appeal upward, to turn a grievance into formal language, to ask that power correct itself. The famous literary image of the eloquent complainant, though shaped by artistic and moral purposes, reflects a wider Egyptian admiration for proper speech in the pursuit of justice. To speak well, to argue rightly, to place one's case within ma'at, is itself a kind of power. Not everyone has equal access to that power, but the ideal exists the wronged person should be heard. By the end of the day, the law is not an abstract institution standing apart from life. It is in the sealed jar, the borrowed tool, the boundary stone, the marriage agreement, the ration list, the inheritance claim, the oath, the witness, the complaint carried to an official, and the neighbour whose words cannot be taken back. Ancient Egypt's daily order is impressive not because conflict is absent, but because conflict is expected and managed through custom, writing, authority, religion, and social pressure. Ma'at is not a calm condition that simply exists. It is a task, like a mud brick wall after wind, like a canal after silt, like a field after floodwater. It must be repaired again and again. If law tries to repair disorder among the living, Burial tries to repair the most frightening disorder of all. Death in ancient Egypt is not treated as an ending that cuts a person cleanly away from the household. It is a passage, a danger, a transformation, and a continuing relationship. The dead do not disappear into silence. They remain near the living through tombs, names, offerings, memory, objects, rituals, and obligations that can last for generations if fortune, wealth, and descendants allow. This is why the Egyptian world of daily life cannot be separated from cemeteries. The house and the tomb face one another across the boundary of existence, and much of ordinary behavior is shaped by the knowledge that every living person is also preparing, directly or indirectly, to become an ancestor. The geography of Egypt makes this relationship visible. In many places, the cultivated land stretches along the river while cemeteries rise at the desert edge. The living occupy the green land where water and crops return. The dead rest in the dry margins where bodies, textiles, wood, papyrus, and painted surfaces have a better chance of survival. This is practical, but it also becomes symbolic. The fertile valley is motion, labour, growth, and noise. The desert is stillness, preservation, and distance. A person can look from a field toward the cliffs and know that the dead are not in some impossible elsewhere. They are nearby, placed where the river's damp abundance gives way to dryness and eternity. For most Egyptians, death preparation is not the golden world of royal tombs. It is smaller, more local, and shaped by wealth. Elite tombs may contain painted scenes, carved texts, fine coffins, jewellery, food offerings, furniture, shabti figures, amulets, and elaborate burial equipment. A poorer person may receive a much simpler burial, with fewer goods and less durable materials. Many people leave little that can be confidently reconstructed. The evidence remains incomplete. And preservation favours those with resources, those buried in dry places, and those whose graves were not disturbed. This means the afterlife of the poor is harder to see archaeologically, even though they too lived within a culture saturated by ideas of death, memory, and protection. Mummification is one of Egypt's most famous practices, but it is not one single unchanging procedure applied equally to everyone. It develops over time, varies by period, and depends heavily on status and resources. The basic logic is preservation. The body matters because identity after death is not imagined as purely spiritual in the modern abstract sense. The person is a complex being, involving body, name, shadow, heart, ka, bae, and other aspects of identity that must be sustained, protected, and reunited in proper ways. Preserving the body helps preserve the person's future. Yet many Egyptians could not afford elaborate embalming. Natural desiccation in desert burials may preserve bodies without the full artificial procedures known from elite contexts. Later, more elaborate methods involve removal of organs, natron drying, oils, resins, linen wrapping, amulets, masks, coffins, and ritual acts. But the details change across centuries. No single explanation fully accounts for every burial, because Egyptian death practice is both deeply conservative and constantly adapting. The tomb is not simply a storage chamber for a corpse, it is a machine for memory. Its images and objects help create a desired afterlife, but they also speak to the living. Scenes of farming, feasting, fishing, hunting, craft work, music, offering, and family are not random decoration. They present an ideal world in which the deceased continues to receive abundance, status, and joy. The irony is that many of the best images of daily life survive because they were painted for the dead. We see bakers, brewers, farmers, dancers, scribes, servants, boatmen, and craft workers through tomb walls whose purpose was not to document ordinary life for future historians, but to provide and symbolize eternal sustenance for one privileged person. The record is rich, but it is not innocent. It preserves daily life through the filter of afterlife desire. Offerings are central: bread, beer, beef, fowl, vegetables, incense, linen, water, and other goods may be placed physically, represented in art, or invoked through words. The offering formula becomes one of the most repeated acts of Egyptian remembrance: to speak the proper words, to present food, to keep the name alive. These actions sustain the dead. A family visiting a tomb does more than honour memory in a sentimental sense. They participate in a reciprocal relationship. The dead may depend on offerings, the living may hope for ancestral favour, protection, or continuity. Forgetting the dead is dangerous because it weakens the chain that ties generations together. This makes the name extraordinarily important. To erase a name is to attack existence. To preserve a name is to let a person continue in some form. Ordinary Egyptians may not all possess grand inscriptions, but the desire to be named runs through the culture. Names appear on stelae, coffins, offering tables, letters to the dead, tomb walls, and small objects. A name anchors identity. It says that this person was not merely a body, not merely labour, not merely a passing breath in the heat, but someone located in a family, a community, and the cosmic order. Letters to the dead reveal one of the most intimate forms of this relationship. In some periods and contexts, living people address deceased relatives with requests, complaints, or appeals for help. These texts can be emotionally complex. A person might ask an ancestor to intervene in a dispute, heal an illness, protect a household, or explain why trouble has come. They do not always fit comfortably into modern categories of prayer, legal appeal, family letter, or magical action. Scholars still debate the exact social settings of these texts, but they show that death does not end communication. The dead remain socially present, capable of being addressed, blamed, honoured, or asked for aid. Funerals themselves bring together practical labour and sacred meaning. A body must be prepared, goods must be gathered, relatives must organise rites, mourners must perform grief in socially meaningful ways. Priests or ritual specialists may recite texts and carry out ceremonies according to status and resources. The procession from the world of the living to the cemetery is both physical and symbolic. A person who once walked the village streets is carried toward the desert edge. Objects from life, images of abundance, protective amulets, and ritual words accompany them because the journey is dangerous. The afterlife is hoped for, but not automatic. It must be made secure. The famous judgment of the dead, especially in later and more developed forms, expresses the moral dimension of this journey. The heart is weighed against the principle of truth and order. The deceased hopes to be found justified, not destroyed or excluded from blessed existence. This idea links daily conduct with eternity, how one lives matters: honesty, restraint, justice, care for others, proper ritual, and alignment with Mayat are not merely social preferences, they carry cosmic weight. Of course, tomb texts often present ideal self-portraits. A person's claim to virtue may be formal, selective, or aspirational. Still, the ideal tells us what Egyptians wanted death to recognize: that a life had belonged to order, not chaos. By sunset, when the desert cliffs darken and the river reflects the last light, The nearness of the dead feels less like an abstraction. The living return to their houses, but the tombs remain visible, holding bodies, names, hopes, and unfinished relationships. Daily life continues because bread is baked. Tools are mended, disputes are argued, children are taught, boats are loaded, fields are watered. Yet beneath these acts lies the long preparation for memory. Ancient Egyptians do not live only for death, as popular clichés sometimes suggest. They live intensely in the present, with food, work, affection, conflict, beauty, illness, laughter, and worry. But they live with death beside them, not as a negation of life, but as the shadow that gives memory its urgency. To be alive is to prepare a name that may one day need to be spoken by someone else. But the closer daily life seems to come, the more clearly its shadows appear. Ancient Egypt feels unusually visible because it left so much behind: tombs, temples, coffins, papyri, statues, tools, pottery, jewellery, mummies, town ruins, painted scenes, and names carved deep into stone. Compared with many ancient societies, Egypt can seem almost over-preserved. Yet this abundance can deceive. The Egypt that survives is not the whole Egypt that lived. It is a selected, damaged, uneven, and often accidental record, shaped by wealth, dryness, burial customs, later reuse, excavation history, and the interests of the people who made the objects in the first place. Daily life is everywhere in the evidence, but it is rarely preserved on its own terms. The first distortion is material. Stone lasts, mud brick does not always last, gold dazzles, basketry decays, painted tombs attract attention, workyards erode, papyrus can survive in dry conditions, but most writing once used in ordinary administration has vanished. Linen may endure in tombs, but the worn cloth of daily labour is more fragile. Wood is often precious, reused, broken, or consumed by time. Food remains survive only under certain conditions. The more ordinary an object is, the more likely it was to be used until damaged, repaired until useless, discarded without ceremony, and then destroyed by moisture, insects, fire, later building, or simple decay. Egypt's everyday world was full of perishable things, and the record has a way of favouring what was meant for memory over what was meant for use. This is why tombs are both priceless and dangerous sources. Tomb paintings show baking, brewing, fishing, ploughing, harvesting, herding, weaving, dancing, feasting, sailing, hunting, and offering. Without them, modern understanding of Egyptian work and ritual would be far poorer. But tomb scenes are not documentary films. They are carefully composed images made for the dead, often for elites, shaped by religious purpose, social ideals, artistic conventions, and the desire to create an eternal abundance. A tomb owner who shows fields, servants, cattle, and food is not necessarily recording a normal Tuesday. He is constructing a vision of provision, status, and cosmic order. The images contain real details, but they are arranged inside an ideal world. Texts create another distortion. Scribes preserve Egypt in words, but scribes are not neutral microphones placed in every street. They write for institutions, courts, temples, estates, training, law, memory, and administration. Their records tell us what needed counting, proving, teaching, praising, or controlling. They reveal rations, absences, quarrels, deliveries, taxes, letters, contracts, and prayers. But they also leave gaps around feelings, informal habits, unrecorded speech, private grief, jokes that were never written, meals too ordinary to mention, and the lives of people who had little access to writing. The evidence remains incomplete not because these lives lacked meaning, but because meaning does not always become ink. Archaeology helps correct this imbalance, but archaeology has its own limits. A house foundation can reveal room arrangement, but not every conversation that passed through it. An oven can show food production, but not whether the bread was eaten in comfort, resentment, hunger, celebration, or exhaustion. A figurine in a domestic room may suggest protection, devotion, healing, play, memory, or ritual. But without a text or clear context, certainty becomes fragile. A broken jar may indicate storage, trade, reuse, or discard. A concentration of ash may mark cooking, craft activity, cleaning, accident, or repeated habit. Archaeologists read patterns, not miracles. They build careful interpretations from fragments. And scholars still debate many details because the same object can carry more than one possible life. Amarna is a powerful example of both richness and caution. Because the city was founded rapidly under Akhenaten and abandoned after a relatively short occupation, it preserves a rare view of houses, workshops, streets, suburbs, temples, administrative spaces, and cemeteries. Its domestic ruins allow modern researchers to examine how people lived in a planned royal city that was not continuously rebuilt for centuries afterward. Yet Amarna is also unusual. It was a new capital created for a dramatic religious and political experiment. Its population, layout, economy, and abandonment history do not represent every Egyptian town. It gives an extraordinary window, but not a complete mirror. What survives there can illuminate daily life while still belonging to a special moment. Deir el-Medina presents the same problem from another angle. Its records are astonishingly human sick days, ration complaints, lawsuits, love, conflict, sketches, jokes, household property, and religious devotion. It brings ordinary people closer than they almost anywhere else in pharaonic Egypt. Yet its residents were not average Egyptians. They were skilled royal tomb workers, relatively well supplied when the system functioned, unusually literate, and located in a specialized community beside a royal necropolis. Their lives help us hear the texture of ancient work and family, but they cannot simply stand for every farmer, fisher, herder, servant, or craft worker along the Nile. The best preserved lives are often the least typical ones. Even human remains must be read carefully. Bones and teeth can reveal diet, injury, labor stress, disease, age, and sometimes migration or ancestry. Mummies can preserve hair, skin, organs, textiles, amulets, and traces of embalming practice. Scientific techniques can detect residues, parasites, trauma, nutrition, and chemical signatures. These methods have transformed the study of ancient Egypt, but they do not make the dead speak plainly. A worn spine may suggest hard labor, but not the person's exact occupation. Toothwear may reflect gritty bread, but diet, age, and individual habit complicate the picture. A burial with few goods may indicate poverty, disturbance, local custom, or preservation loss. No single skeleton contains a full biography. Objects in museums add another layer of distance: a finely carved cosmetic spoon, a faience bead, a copper tool, a painted coffin, a beer jar, or a woven sandal may be displayed under glass, separated from the smell, dust, heat, noise, and hands that once gave it meaning. Museums preserve things beautifully, but display can make daily objects seem cleaner. rarer, and more isolated than they were. A pot in a case once belonged to a chain of use clay dug from earth, shaped by hand, fired with risk, filled, carried, spilled, washed, cracked, reused, discarded, buried, excavated, catalogued, and interpreted. The object survives, but most of its life has escaped. There is also the problem of time. Ancient Egypt lasts for more than 3,000 years as a pharaonic civilization, and longer still when broader Nile Valley histories are considered. Daily life in the Old Kingdom is not identical to daily life in the New Kingdom. A village in Middle Egypt is not the same as a delta town. A temple worker, a herder, a noblewoman, a Nubian soldier in Egyptian service, a Libyan-descended family, a Greek-speaking resident of later Egypt, and a royal scribe do not inhabit one simple culture frozen in time. Popular imagination often compresses Egypt into a single golden moment, but real Egyptian life changes across dynasties, crises, foreign contacts, technological shifts, religious transformations, and local conditions. So the honest reconstruction of daily life must remain double-voiced. It can say that Egyptians ate bread and beer, built mud brick houses, wore linen, valued family, counted grain, worshipped gods, cared for the dead, worked fields, moved by river, and lived under the pressure of heat, labour, bureaucracy, and belief. But it must also admit that the exact texture of many lives is gone. The laughter in a courtyard, the private fear before a bad harvest, the taste of a family recipe, the tone of a mother's instruction, the irritation between neighbours, the favourite song of a boatman, the last thoughts of a potter looking across the river at dusk. These things rarely survive directly, and yet the fragments are not small. A chipped bowl, a worn threshold, a child's practice sign, a woman's legal claim, a worker's absence note, a broken amulet, a repaired sandal, a grain silo, a painted field, a copper tool, a mud brick wall line, all of them resist silence. They do not give us everything, but they give us enough to know that ancient Egypt was not only an idea of eternity, it was a lived world, preserved imperfectly, asking to be approached with imagination disciplined by evidence. What the record hides is immense. What it reveals is still astonishing. What lasts longest from ancient Egypt is often what was never meant to stand alone. A farmer cutting barley in a tomb scene was painted to feed the dead, but he now feeds historical memory. A baker leaning over an oven was part of an eternal offering, yet his posture preserves the knowledge of heat, grain, and labour. A scribe's rushed note about rations was probably not written for distant centuries, but it now reveals the pressure behind a royal project. A broken pot, once too common to value, becomes precious because it carries the shape of ordinary use. The long afterlife of ancient Egypt does not belong only to kings, queens, gods, and conquerors. It belongs also to the people who made civilization happen without expecting their own names to be spoken thousands of years later. The famous rulers still dominate the skyline of memory. Khufu's pyramid, Hatshepsut's terraces, Akhenaten's city, Tutankhamun's tomb, Ramesses II's statues. Cleopatra's legend, these names draw the eye because power is built to be seen. Ancient kings understood display. They carved titles, raised obelisks, commissioned temples, claimed victories, and placed themselves between gods and people. But if daily life has shown anything, it is that no royal ambition stands by itself. A pyramid requires quarrymen, boatmen, rope makers, surveyors, scribes, bakers, brewers, potters, physicians, herders, farmers, water carriers, and organisers of food. A temple requires estates, offerings, linen, incense, metal tools, priests, cleaners, gardeners, singers, guards, and accountants. A tomb requires artists, carpenters, plasterers, stonecutters, and families who understand why memory matters. Royal Egypt is the visible crest of a much deeper human river. The farmer may be the most important forgotten figure of all. His work is seasonal, repetitive, and vulnerable to forces beyond control. He watches flood levels, prepares fields, handles animals, cuts grain, and faces taxes that transform harvest into state power. He may never see the inside of the great tombs whose scenes preserve agricultural labour, yet without him there is no surplus to support builders, priests, administrators, soldiers, or artists. In the long story of Egypt, the farmer is not background. He is the condition that makes the foreground possible. The craft worker leaves another kind of afterlife. A bead, a bowl, a linen cloth, a copper tool, a carved box, a painted coffin, a model boat, a faience amulet, a basket, a sandal, or a wooden headrest carries the intelligence of hands. Modern museums often separate objects from the noise of their making, but every crafted thing once belonged to a world of material judgment. Clay had to be tempered properly, flax had to be spun finely, pigments had to be mixed, stone had to be struck without ruining it, metal had to be heated, poured, hammered, repaired, or sharpened. Some makers worked for royal or temple institutions, others served local needs. Many remain anonymous, but anonymity is not emptiness. Their skill survives even when their names do not. Women's lives also continue through traces that are often quieter than royal monuments, but no less important. A legal document, a property claim, a textile tool, a household object, a burial, a letter, a figure of protection, or a family scene may reveal a woman acting within the economy of the home and the law. Women manage households, inherit goods, make claims, raise children, supervise work, produce textiles, participate in religious practice, and carry family continuity. The evidence remains incomplete, and social reality varies sharply by class and period, but the surviving record refuses to reduce women to decoration. They are part of the operating structure of Egypt. The scribe's afterlife is more obvious because writing preserves him and because he preserved others. Yet even scribes are not all grand officials. Some are local record keepers, village scribes, students, accountants, letter writers, copyists, and practical administrators. They stand between the spoken and the lasting. Their work can feel dry, but dryness is deceptive. A list of grain rations holds hunger, debt, organization, anger, and dependence inside numbers. A school exercise holds ambition. A petition holds grievance. A contract holds caution. A letter holds distance. Ancient Egypt survives in part because scribes turned everyday pressure into ink. The great surprise is that ordinary Egypt outlasts royal Egypt in a way the kings may not have intended. A pharaoh's name may be carved on stone, but modern understanding of Egypt grows richer when attention moves toward mud brick, refuse heaps, settlement plans, skeletal remains, textile fragments, food residues, and informal drawings. The question is no longer only what kings wanted remembered, it is what daily life accidentally preserved. A worker at Deir el-Medina explaining an absence, a household at Amana leaving behind tools and jars, a town in the delta revealing storage and urban density, a metalworking trace in a settlement, a domestic shrine whose meaning is only partly understood. These small survivals complicate the grand story. They make Egypt stranger, closer, and more human. What survives in the record suggests that ancient Egyptians did not experience their world as a museum of wonders. They experienced it as weather, work, pain, beauty, obligation, hunger, gossip, prayer, skill, family, law, sickness, celebration, and fear of being forgotten. The pyramids were already old to many Egyptians who lived later in pharaonic history. Temples rose, fell, were restored, reused, and reinterpreted. Capitals shifted, dynasties ended, foreign powers entered, languages changed. Gods rose in prominence and receded, but the river continued to matter, bread continued to matter, household storage continued to matter, names continued to matter. No single explanation fully accounts for the endurance of Egypt's image in the modern world. There is the power of preservation, the drama of tombs, the beauty of art, the mystery of hieroglyphs, the scale of monuments, the fascination of mummies, and the long history of excavation, collection, and interpretation. But beneath all of this is something simpler. Egypt remains compelling because it combines distance and recognition. Its gods may seem strange, its scripts complex, its royal claims enormous, but its people wake, work, eat, argue, love, worry, age, remember, and die. The gap between them and us is vast, yet daily life builds a narrow bridge across it. By the end, ancient Egypt is not reduced by looking at ordinary people. It becomes larger. The king still stands in his temple. The tomb still glows with painted order. The Nile still moves through the valley. But now, around these images, there are houses of mud brick, roofs under night air, jars sealed with care, women defending property, children learning signs, potters judging clay, farmers watching water, boatmen reading wind, workers protesting late rations, priests washing for ritual, families speaking names of the dead, and countless people whose lives were never meant to become famous. They are the hidden majority of Egypt's long memory. They built no great inscription for themselves, yet they remain in the grain dust, the worn stone, the broken sherd, and the quiet human pressure behind every monument that survived. And so the river keeps moving, long after the last worker leaves the field, long after the lamp goes out inside the mud brick house, long after the scribe's ink dries on a scrap that was never meant to become history. The Nile continues through the dark. It carries moonlight, silt, reeds, insects, reflections of stars, and the memory of settlements that have sunk back into earth. On its banks, the green land narrows into shadow. Beyond it, the desert waits with the patience of stone. The people of ancient Egypt are gone, but not entirely. They remain in the ordinary things they touched. A loaf painted on a tomb wall, a sandal worn thin at the heel, a jar repaired before it was finally discarded, a bead once held close to the skin, a child's uneven practice sign, a worker's complaint, a woman's claim to property, a house wall patched with fresh mud against another season of heat. These are not grand things. Yet they are enough to remind us that civilization is not only what rises above the horizon, it is also what happens below eye level, in hands, rooms, streets, and habits. Time changes the scale of everything. A powerful king becomes a name, a city becomes a mound, a family becomes a few objects in dry soil, a voice becomes a line of ink, or nothing at all. But daily life leaves a different kind of trace. It survives because it was repeated. Bread was made again and again. Water was carried again and again. Fields were measured. Halls repaired, names spoken, offerings placed, linen folded, grain counted, children taught, and the dead remembered. Repetition became endurance. Perhaps that is why ancient Egypt still feels alive, not because its monuments are silent and perfect, but because behind them we can sense motion. Someone is walking home in the evening heat. Someone is listening for a boat at the riverbank. Someone is grinding grain before dawn. Someone is looking toward the desert, knowing that one day their own name will need to be remembered. The final image is not gold, or stone, or a crown. It is a house beside the Nile after sunset. The roof is cooling. The fields are dark. A small lamp burns inside. Around it, a family settles into the fragile shelter of another night, while the river passes quietly beyond the walls, carrying Egypt forward into memory.